Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Renaissance Room podcast. And in today's episode, I don't really know like what angle we're going to kind of be coming from in here, but I think I just kind of want to talk a little bit about a rebrand, a refreshing, okay, a new rushing wind. All right. So, being someone who immerses themselves, right, in African American history and enjoys learning about African American literature, I think in the beginning stages, right, when you're laying the foundation, right, when you're peeling back the curtain and you're learning so many new things, I do think there is a little bit of anger and rage and emotions that come up because you start to realize the things that you've been told and the very poorly justifications that have been given to you, right, to describe your circumstances, your shortcomings, why your family may have been dysfunctional, right, all the very real implications that racism, systemic oppression, right, the crack era, all of these really significant historical events have had on your family and in your community, right. We like to talk about Black history as something that happened long ago, but we are the descendants of a lot of the things that took place within our community. And so when you first start learning about African American history, just by default, you are going to find yourself enraged, right? You're going to find yourself angry because you're going to start to recount, right, all the times that you did experience microaggressions, all the times that you were overlooked or discriminated against for employment, right? All the times in which your economic and your physical disposition, like all these things, genuinely were impacted, right? And maybe even fast forward today, and how some of us, right, our relationships have been impacted due to racism, right, and all these different things. And so you do start to kind of sit with a little bit of grief, right? Because that's really what it is, for how you've been treated, for the ways in which your life has, maybe unfolded, and a little bit of that was out of your control, right? That's why we do the work and we have the conversations. But I'm very mindful to always say, hey, listen, right, we can't have the conversations about, certain things that have taken place within our community, how it's impacted us in shortcomings, right? And simultaneously have conversations about agency, right? Because it would be contradictory, right? And two things are very much true, but not at the same time, right? So it's important to be mindful when we start having these conversations. But one thing I will say, and I think we spoke about this on this channel, you guys know I'm a believer, and I think we've spoke about this, right? We spoke about our faith, and we've spoke about what it is to be a intellectual and kind of find yourself on that battleground, right? Not just necessarily within the Black community and being somebody who's a Black, or I'm sorry, a scholar of African American history or African American culture, right? African American literature, okay. But somebody who, you are a believer and you do find yourself in this space and you don't necessarily hate all people and you're not enraged and you're not this angry person. But sometimes when we kind of start talking about being on the forefront in certain spaces, right, we do kind of have this sort of like marketing gambit where we do sort of kind of like triumph over our faith, and we do kind of feel like we have to choose one or the other, right? We can't be Christian and an African American scholar. We can't be an advocate for the Black community and be a Christian, right? Because part of that is anti-Blackness, but part of it is actually the ways in which we're socialized within American society, right? So as you guys know, I've referenced Sue Browder's Subverted. I've been reading that book, and I've been referencing it in a previous episodes. But she spoke about how, during the 70s, right, like if you were someone who practiced faith, whether you were a Catholic or a Christian, it kind of became this thing to talk about God in a certain way and sort of like debunk certain things in a certain kind of way, right? And kind of debunk Christianity, right? And it was kind of like a cool thing. It was more of a status symbol, right? Or at least a signifier to say, hey, listen, I'm cool, right? I'm intellectual. I'm above this, right? But I think for many people who really do believe in their faith and who really do practice their faith and they live it out in their everyday lives, I think that could be a little bit conflicting for some scholars, right? For some people who maybe are in professional spaces or whatever, and they don't actually want to, totally erase their faith. I know right now we're talking about Christian nationalism, and I think it's important for a lot of people to know that just how we do have the differences in cultures, right? What was taking place during the 70s, during the civil rights movement, during feminist movement, right? All these movements within American society, it was always happening on two different sides of the fence, right? Like we were fighting for rights, women were fighting for, equality. Like there was always different things that were taking place within history, within our society, because we are a nation that is divided. So I say that to say it's important to know when we do have conversations, you know, and I'm referencing black people, just realize that like we weren't really all in the same, like we wasn't shooting with each other in the gym. You know what I mean? Like we were all doing our own different things, and that's even still what it is today. And I say that to say it's important to note that the Negro gospel is very different than white gospel, right? For a lot of people, its origins, right, have been in intellectualism, right? And prior to that, it's been in, you know, keeping those oppressed, right, because of slavery. And so for black people, it's always been this thing of liberation, right? And I think there's always kind of been this spiritual aspect to it, to where, you know, some people might call it, you know, I know if you're listening to Sowell, right, Thomas Sowell, then, you know, you might say that it's more of an emotionalism, right? But I would actually say it's more of a spiritual thing, right, for black people, because we know that slaves at the time, they could not read, right? People couldn't read. And even in the music, it's really something that is a completely different experience. I think if you've ever seen the Elvis film, right, they reference that, like Elvis sort of like catches the Holy Ghost, right? And that sort of kind of sets the foundation for his passion for music and so forth. I don't really want to dive too deep into that, because I think there's a lot of complexity. There's a lot of complexity there. And I just think that this podcast would be a lot longer than I want it to be, because I really want to kind of take some time to get some rest. But I wanted to come on and talk about this, and how just encouraging people, because I feel like I found my way through sort of like navigating those spaces, right? Feeling like I couldn't be a Christian, feeling like I couldn't, you know, and it's not about being a Christian, right? It's not about feeling like you have to market yourself in your faith, right? For me, you guys know it's always been a very personal thing. But as you do grow in your faith, you do want to share it with people. You know what I mean? If it is something that you genuinely practice, and most importantly, you live it, you walk it, it is who you is. I mean, I'm sorry, it's within you, right? Like, so you want to be someone who can, you know, fully be yourself. I do think sometimes we, you know, as black people, I do feel like we kind of have that sort of like dichotomous nature with our faith and so forth. And so I think you can still go to church. You know, you can go to church, you can participate in all the things, and still be, you know what I mean, at the pep rally advocating for the people. You know what I mean? And still have your nonprofit organization where you're specializing in helping African American people and communities and things like that. Like, I think you still can be all the things. And so I guess I'm more so just coming on today to just kind of like liberate somebody and let you know you don't really have to choose, and you don't have to brand yourself as, you know, I'm a Christian and this is all I'm going to talk about. Like, no, this is who I am. This is what I'm about. I'm a loving person. I believe in God. You know what I mean? It's something that I live in my day-to-day life, right? I'm all about walking and a little less talking. That's why I said I don't know, you know, what ministry would look like for me personally, right? But I do believe that if you are a believer and you really are who you say you are and you're really about it, I think you got a responsibility to show up in the world in a different way. And I think we do have to be the light, right? And all the things, right? The city on the hill that can't be hidden. The light on the hill that can't be hidden, right? So, yeah, you know, at the end of the day, I guess I'm just coming on to encourage somebody and just let you know I found my way through that, feeling like I had to choose either or, feeling like I had to be all in on one side or the other. Like I said, a little bit of that is anti-blackness, a little bit of that is marketing propaganda, that's sort of like a cool kid popularity type of thing, and a little bit of that is just a lack of cultural reference, right? Our faith is very real, and I don't want to say our faith is very real because this is where I don't want to do, right? I don't want to be divisive, right? So I'll just say it like this, you know. Faith, if you really practice it, if you really live it, you know, if you let God work through you, if it's been an ongoing journey, and maybe I can't even say it like that. I'm just going to say that the Negro gospel, right? Black people, there is a very beautiful, rich history in the gospel for us. And if you haven't, you know, had an understanding to learn about it, I will be sharing some books as I always do. Okay. If you don't have that foundation, you don't have that understanding, you can get swept up in the Christian nationalism. You can get swept up in the critique of Christianity, and you can be so, bombarded with all of the really bad things that take place in church because people just aren't who they say they are, and they're deceptive, and, you know, humans are humans, you know what I mean? And people are evil, and, you know, you can get swept up in that. And so, let me not say that so matter of factly, right? It's not that people are evil. People be engaging with certain things that are evil and, you know, so forth. But there, this is a call to the believer out there who, God is calling you, God misses you, your faith is very real, that God has carried you through some very hard times, that even if you are so far from even praying and needing God, and even being in a space in your life where you feel like you even want to be around God, and you feel so above it, and you worked hard, and you're very smart, and all these different things, God is always there with you, even in that quiet space. And I just want to let you know, like, God misses you. You know what I mean? You don't have to be either or. Like, I don't have to rebrand Renaissance Room as Christian. No, we're gonna be loving. We're gonna speak love. We're gonna speak light. You know what I mean? We're gonna continue to teach. We're gonna continue to do what it is that we do. But we are gonna let you know what we are about and what we stand on. You know what I mean? Where I'm coming from, and how my faith is such a pillar, and the way that I love people, the way that I love in general. I don't even want to say love people, because, to be honest, honey, come on now. Y'all know what it is. But in just being a loving person, and what, where that comes from. A lot of times people will be like, oh, you guys will say certain things that are very positive, and you'll notice certain things about me. And it's true. I do believe that, like, a lot of the light and a lot of the love and all the things that I give, I do believe is because I'm a child of God. I know that for a fact. You know what I mean? How you, like, go through certain things in life and you're like, I absolutely should be grimy. Like, I should just be, like, if anybody had a rite of passage, you know what I mean? You guys want to talk about victims and people sharing their stories and coming forward, and, like, if anybody's got a story, like, I should be grimy. You know what I mean? But, like, God has kept me. You know what I mean? God has kept me, and God has done such a work on me in my life, and just being able to grow and be this very, like, gracious woman that I've always wanted to be, or at least I'm still growing in, right? I might be tested today, because Lord knows, it's be like, you be like, I'm patient, and you be tested, like, in traffic, like, you know what? I'm in progress. I'm in process, So anyway, I just wanted to come on here and let you know that whatever it is that you do in your life, you know what I mean? Walk in step, walk in alignment. You know what I mean? You don't have to divide yourself if you're an African American person. You don't have to feel like you can't partake in your culture or partake in your community activities, or you cannot speak out about injustice, right? Everyone always talks about the Proverb 31 woman, and we love to say, oh, she had all these businesses. But one thing that stands out to me in Proverbs 31 is that she gives a voice to the voiceless, right? And that's me. That's what I'm about. And that just resonates with my spirit so bad. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like it's always like she was up at 5, like, honey, I probably ain't gonna wake up at 5 a.m. if we ain't gotta be somewhere. You know what I mean? But, like, come on, so it's different versions of biblical womanhood, but I think that that's just a verse that really stands out to me personally. And so that's what I'm about. And I just wanted to come on here and encourage you guys and just let you know, like, be yourself, be all who God created you to be, because that's how he made you. You know what I mean? You don't have to get into assembly and be like, oh, I have to be like this. And you don't have to rally with some radicals who are like, listen, this is what it is. And, anybody else can get it. You know what I mean? You don't have to stay in that space and that heart posture, right, of, like, anger. You know what I mean? Because we all know, most people, I would say, who listen to my podcast and who are under the sound of my voice, you've been in integrated spaces. It's not all people. You know what I mean? We don't even have to have this conversation. And I don't like having this conversation, right? Because I think every Black person, regardless of whether you want to or not, right, you're going to be in integrated spaces. And that's even as a little child. So, a lot of times when we do this work as activists and we do this work as educators, right, you get people in the comments and they're feeling so defensive. And it's like, well, why can't it be all people? Why does it have to be Black people? And it's like, well, when you're a white person, you don't really have to be in spaces with other Black people. Like, you know what I mean? You almost have to go out your way to put yourself in spaces with other Black people. And that's kind of what you're seeing today. And we're trying to find this balance socially, right, as we've integrated on, how to partake and how to appreciate one another and one another's culture and the language and all the things without appropriating, right? That's always kind of been the boundary. That's always kind of been the conversation, right? The ongoing conversation. So, it's just one of those things where it's like, if you've never really had to partake on other people because just by default, right, your community, everything was organized in such a way to where you were at the center, everyone who looks like you were in a position of authority, right, then you're not going to understand it, right? And so this is kind of where we have to draw the line. Like, it's certain things that you just won't always understand. but it doesn't mean that hate is being broadcasted, or hate is being, orchestrated behind certain movements, right? That's projection. That is something that is, rooted in white supremacy, right? If you look at, even white supremacy in terms of Christianity, the Klan, all those different things, right? Our movements has always been about love and uplifting people. And, something I always think about is, as a black person, I even in 2026, right, and even moving forward, right, I've been in spaces where white people have made me feel uncomfortable, right? I've been in spaces where I walked into retailers and baby, I ain't talking about no big designer. I'm talking about the Gap. You heard, like GAP, okay? And you know what I mean? People looking at me, and I'm experiencing racial discrimination, and it's heavy, and it's like I feel like, dang, am I stealing? And I know I ain't even stealing, you know what I mean? But it's like I'm being treated, and it's like, seen as like, you can't afford this, you're not worthy, you know what I mean? It's certain stores I won't even go into, and that's in 2026. So it's like, if you're not an African American person, you don't understand that. I know you want to do your TikToks, and I know you want to have an opinion about so forth, and you want to feel like we should be all kumbaya, and I get it, I really do, but like we still got work to do. You know what I mean? Like, we still got work to do, right? Now on the flip side, right, any white person come to a all black event with their kids, their family, what black people doing? Handing out lemonade, here go this for the kids, like very loving, very loving. We love when people partake in our culture, right? Black people are a very community-based type-minded individuals, right? And we spoke about this. I told you guys I was listening to NPR Code Switch with Gene Dumby, and he was just talking about, he was speaking with, I don't even know if she was an actor. I think she might have been a professor. It's a most recent podcast, so it's NPR Code Switch. The most recent podcast, it was called White Culture. I don't remember the host. I do apologize. So I'm going to do a really, really botchy paraphrase. So you guys are going to have to go back and listen to that if you really want the reference. But she just kind of was speaking about, how white individuals are very individualistic, right? It's all about like what we need to do and what I need to do, like me, right? Whereas black people are always like organizing. How can we help other black people? How can we lift other black people? How can we, like, everything that we do is like, how can we help one another, right? Every artist I've ever met, like from fashion to painters, right? It's like, I want to represent the community. I want to uplift the community. You know what I mean? And so it's very admirable, and it's Black History Month. And so you guys know that I'm encouraging one another. I'm uplifting you guys, right? And I just love it. And I think the more that we love ourselves, we have to realize that we don't have to justify that. We don't have to argue that, right? So it's important to, note that certain spaces aren't for everybody, right? You're not going to walk into a Native American meeting or a Muslim meeting and start talking about me, that individualist. Like, you're not going to try to impose on somebody else's culture, right? Just to kind of feel, because you feel some type of way, right? That's ignorance. You know what I mean? Black people have a culture, right? It's Black History Month. I hope you're doing your readings. All right. Black people have a culture, and, that's what it is. So you have to, at the end of the day, it's respecting the culture, and it's respecting our faith as well, because it really was our ancestor prayers. And I'm not really big on like ancestors and that type of spirituality, but I'm not against anybody who is. That's your thing, that's your thing. You know what I mean? I'm not that type of believer. I believe what I believe, and I move how I move. God bless you. But I will say, so, understand Nat Turner, led the biggest slave revolt. You know what I mean? He wanted to free people through the Bible, and just all the things that have really taken place with that. I know there's books out there. Like I said, I will be sharing the book. I actually have a book on the way. But I understand that the Negro gospel was the thing that really liberated us. You know what I mean? There was nothing else that we had. You know what I mean? You think about when, our ancestors, right, and those before us were being sold into slavery, and they were praying to one another as their families are being sold off. Like, come on, man. You know what I mean? This thing really came alive, and I know we can't even possibly fathom all the years. You know what I mean? We can't fathom all the years. Like, and it's something that is so humbling, and so, it just brings such a spirit of somber. You know what I mean? Like, when you really think about how long it took for us to be here. So, there's just we're so blessed. We're so blessed, and we have such a beautiful and rich culture, and that culture is rooted in Christianity. That culture does have its origins in Christianity. And I encourage you, if that's your faith and that's what you're about, and you're on the fence, or you feel like you do have to kind of deconstruct or critique in a certain way, right? Deconstruction is not solely about, let me just say this. I personally believe that deconstruction is not solely about just completely debunking and like ridding your spirituality. I think it's more so about, okay, hey, listen, here are some things that we have been taught about our faith, right? Maybe it's from our oppressors or whatever, but like, here's what we've been taught. This is how we move accordingly. You know what I mean? I don't think it's like, Christianity is whack, X, Y, and Z, because I just, me personally, some people who move like that, I'm not going to say it's everybody, but a lot of people, I don't be seeing that light. I don't be seeing that love. I don't be seeing that glow. You know what I mean? I don't be seeing that glow. I don't know, I don't know what it is, but it's like something about God and rocking with the Lord. It's just a little glow in your life. Like you don't look like what you've been through. You know what I mean? And some people who be kind of talking that rah-rah on that freedom fighter, like, just be like, okay, you starting to look like I'm looking at you, and I can tell your spirit needs rest. You know what I mean? So Black people, if that is your faith, and if you are somebody who is fighting this good fight of advocacy, right, and continuing the Black plight, okay, to freedom, okay, you don't have to be strong. You can rest in the Lord. You know what I mean? You can replenish yourself in the Lord. You don't have to have a ministry, right? The Bible even tells us not all of us are called to be ministers. We're not all called to be teachers, because with teaching comes great criticism, great scrutiny. All right. And I think in ministry, you need to have a certain level of consecration. That's a lot of reading of the Bible. It's a lot of studying of the Bible, but, so I'm going to go ahead and end here, and I just hope that this encourages somebody. Like I said, God is good, and, you can be all who you can be. And I think it's time for Black people to know that, and more specifically, African-American Christians to know that they can be all that they can be, and, in their gifts and all the things that God has created them to be. And, you're loved. Peace.